Hi, everyone. Welcome to EarthX 2025. Thank you all for being here. Fantastic that you all were able to make it out, the day after a holiday, early Monday morning, so really appreciate it. My name is Peter Simic. I am the conference director here at EarthX, and I helped put together today's program, North Texas Day. How can the region grow sustainably? And we have an amazing lineup of leaders and thought leaders and key advocates in the region that are involved in everything from urban density and planning to wildlife and green space. And so I think this will be a great opportunity for us to all sort of catch up on some of the key projects that are active in the region, and then also hopefully identify some things that are working, some challenges that are still out there, and build some collaboration and partnerships through just being here together in this room today to kind of go out back into the city and make it better. Some housekeeping, as I mentioned. Want to kick off with some sponsor thanks. Atmos Energy, thank you so much for sponsoring today, as well as City of Dallas and DFW Airport. Thank you, as always. Our Encore team is on point in here, and they're working this entire event, and we couldn't do this without them. They're amazing. And also our content partner who helped put together today's program and advise on all of its content, the Greater Dallas Planning Council. Thank you all so much for all your support. We have some volunteers today that I need to reach out. Paul Quinn College is our Platinum Community Champion. Azewow and Frost Bank, they're all helping to provide volunteers for the day, so thank you all. And then I will let our esteemed kickoff presenter, Mr. Cullum Clark of the George Bush Institute, introduce himself and get going. And we're going to start the day sort of how we did last year with an overview of kind of where we are. Obviously North Texas is growing exponentially, and that is both a tremendous amount of opportunity for the future of the region, what we can accomplish, and for opportunity and equity, but also some challenges, especially when it comes to how we grow and where we grow and how we balance the critical need for both built environment and balancing the resources and natural environment that is still both on our fringes and intertwined within the entire city. So Cullum, thank you so much for being here this morning, and really appreciate it, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Hello. It's good to be with you, and it's great to, I'm honored to be here, first of all, and honored that you would come and listen to me in this panel we're going to have on in a few minutes, and really great to see a number of good friends in the world, in the room here, including some that I have been my professors, Bud Melton, I've learned so much from. Good to see you, sir. Just very quick background, and I'm just going to walk around here. It seems kind of constraining to be over there. I am an economist. I have the honor of leading the economic policy work of the George W. Bush Institute. We are the think tank, and as President Bush likes to say, do tank arm of the George W. Bush Presidential Center. Some of you have been in our museum, I hope. Okay, please come. Includes our museum, which is a really terrific look at a very consequential moment in American history and about the presidency in general. But I'm part of the think tank part. So our business is about applying certain timeless American principles, as we see it, among them opportunity, freedom, compassion, to the most pressing issues of our own time. And I get to do that in our economic policy work. And my policy work has focused very much on the economics of place, of places, but at places at different scale, states, regions, cities, towns, neighborhoods, but all starting from this fundamental question: how can we create more prosperous, more inclusive, more opportunity-rich, and more sustainable places at any scale? And I think that's one of the great callings of our time. So anyway, delighted to be talking to you for a few minutes about some of my thoughts on that. Terrific topic we have here around demand, density, and demographics. I'm going to say a little bit about each of those. But let me start by noting that 10 days ago, in the New York Times Magazine, there was an article that you may have seen called, and it had the title, "Why America Should Sprawl." Did anybody see that? So that was written by a fantastic journalist named Connor Doherty, and we spent more than 6 hours together before that. Before he wrote that article, including a long dinner at Terry Black's downtown. He had come with this idea that barbecue in Dallas is not so good compared to like Austin, and I wanted to dispel him of that to dispel that myth. And I think he, in the end, thought it was pretty good. But he's a really interesting writer about housing in America. Among other things, he lives out in the West Coast. He's heavily covered many articles, including, and also a really good book called Golden Gates, about battles over housing and development patterns in the Bay Area. And oftentimes the battles that happen in California then spread eastward across the country. So I think the book is a little bit of a harbinger, maybe. Everything's a little bit different in San Francisco, but nonetheless, a lot of the same issues are arising here. So I was quoted in that article. And the same day the article came out, the Bush Institute published a very substantial report, if I do say so, that I wrote. You can debate whether it's good, but it's long and brimming with data. And I called it Build Homes, Expand Opportunity, and then subtitle Lessons from America's Fastest Growing Cities. And the fundamental question is about housing. It's about how can we actually get out of the housing hole that we're in and build the housing that the American people need, and do it in a way that will, in fact, create more prosperous, more high-opportunity places. And I argue very much throughout the whole long report that housing and opportunity are joined at the hip. You must go after those as one, essentially. And I think in terms of where we all are today, I think we have to also go after those two goals and sustainability all as one. So that's kind of the theme of the report. And I had a lot of material in there that I think agrees pretty much with the main points in Connor's article. So let me explain. So I want to talk a little bit about the outward expansion of growing metropolitan areas in America with our own Dallas-Fort Worth. Who's from Dallas-Fort Worth here? Almost every last person? Okay, so mostly talk about where we are as kind of a case study, but the article, the paper is very much national in scope, as is Connor's article, although the Dallas-Fort Worth area was kind of his case study, if you will. And in the report, I do say I want to learn lessons from America's fastest growing cities. And because of that, I did something that was a little bit unusual, which was to do a kind of a deep dive into not one, but into 25 relatively large, fast-growing metropolitan areas in the Sun Belt and mountain states, from the Carolinas through Texas over to like Arizona and Nevada, okay? And really look carefully at what's happening in terms of development patterns and numbers there. So here's the 3 points I want to make in this talk very quickly. Number one, that outward expansion, let's for the moment put aside the word sprawl because it has very negative connotations. Outward expansion is quite simply inevitable. Feasible in most parts of the United States, and certainly inevitable. Second point I want to make is that how we do it will make all the difference. So when Connor Doherty says why America should sprawl, I think that if you read the whole article and listen to the conversations we had over several hours, you would recognize we could possibly think of sprawl, being an ugly word, as kind of meaning outward expansion done badly. But outward expansion done well is what we really need to aspire to, not as the total solution to all of our housing and other problems in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or in America, but as an important part of the solution. And the third part is I want to encourage you to think, to at least consider the possibility, which might be a little bit counterintuitive, that this pattern that we've had in Dallas-Fort Worth, with some tweaks, with some modernization, if you will, is finally net good. Not perfect. Perfection cannot be reached in this fallen world that we live in, but better than most of the alternatives, and in need of reform, but not overthrow. Okay? So very quickly, those 3 points. Inevitable. Here's several quick points. First of all, on inevitable. There's a scholar named Shlomo Angel, and he and his colleagues have done a number of really path-breaking studies, and they show that over more than 100 years, every built-up urban area in the United States, and almost everyone in foreign countries, every single one has grown less dense over 100 years, typically by dramatic amounts. Huge declines in the number of people per square mile. This is especially the case in places that were quite dense 100 years ago, like Manhattan or Brooklyn, which it's kind of hard to believe because the apartment towers in Manhattan are so much taller than they used to be. And even so, the number of people per square mile has gone dramatically down because the apartments are so much bigger and so fewer people live in them in each one. It's the case everywhere. So to imagine that somehow that's going that this giant human trend is going to reverse, a trend that I think is very rooted in the human desire to have a little bit more space, a little bit more, elbow room, if you will. As we grow wealthier, we seem to want, a little bit more yard or a little bit more house. Not everyone, on average, so though. Really likely to continue, or at least to not heavily reverse. So that's one thing. And the population is, after all, still growing. The good news for all of us who want to figure out how to solve the housing puzzle is that it's growing a lot more slowly than it used to be growing. That will create some interesting problems and challenges for sure, but it is growing slowly. We now in the United States have just over 340 million people, probably. We are on a path, according to the latest government data, to maybe 375 or so in about the year 2070, after which the population will crest and start downwards. Note that's a major decline in the out year, the forward projections as to how many, and the main reason why that is so is a dramatic long-term decline in birth rates. Note that those forecasts also assume that immigration into the United States will continue at something like what has been its long-term path. We, of course, had a big surge way above the long-term trend over the last 4 years. Now it seems really likely to me we're going to have a period below the long-term average in view of the administration's policies. So if immigration is lower, then we will not, in fact, get to 375, but we will be, lower than that. So we still have some population growth we have to house, though. So simple point is if the population grows and the overall density doesn't go up, for sure the metropolitan area's physical extent will grow. Second point is that with the passage of time, the newer the built-up area we build, the lower the density we build it. So if you want to look at the density levels, people per square mile of whole metropolitan areas, I've looked at a lot of data, and I can tell you the single best predictor that I can find of how dense is a place is how old is it. Like how many decades since it first reached, 100,000 people, 250,000, 500,000. I've run all those numbers, and they're very, very predictive, way more than anything else. So essentially, if an area is built more recently, it's less dense, almost automatically, with a few interesting exceptions. So that's the second point. Very likely to continue. A third basic point is that other than in areas that are heavily physically constrained, either by like oceans or by extreme lack of water, like maybe the Phoenix area, we can talk about that if you want as we go through. Basically, you could say it's further expansion, clearly feasible. I mean, where it's hard work. But it clearly can be done in the Dallas area and in other metropolitan areas like us. And let me just put that in perspective a little bit, and I'll come back to this when I'm moderating the group here in just a moment. But I was last week at a sort of a convening with about 15 of us in the room on water in North Texas. And as I was just saying to one of our panelists, every other person in the room is on the front line of building water infrastructure or delivering water in some form. For sure, they all know more than me about how to actually build out water infrastructure, and they know how hard it is, politically, technically, every other way. I don't know anything about how to build anything, so I'm more about the numbers and like what does the history show and what does the data show. And so we had a really different perspective. Their perspective to a person was, this is really hard, like to actually build out the water infrastructure we're going to need to take the Dallas-Fort Worth population from about 8.4 million today to like more than 12 million in the 2050, which is what North Central Texas Council of Governments predicts. I think it'll be a little bit lower, 11 something, but 11 something, 12 something, huge expansion. They just said this is going to be really hard. But my simple answer, which I'm not saying I'm right and they're wrong because they're doing hard work, but my simple answer is like, well, since the year 2000, we went from like 5 million to 8.4, really on the whole, rather successfully. Off somehow all the hardworking people building out electricity and building out water and roads and all this. We certainly didn't do it perfectly, but we did it, and it's pretty likely we can still do it. Sometimes people say, it's so big it can't get any bigger. Well, 100 years ago, if you were in the greater London area, I assure you there was article after article after article saying there's no way this giant agglomeration, biggest urban center in the world at that time. And, well, can you hear me? It's in and out. It could have. Oh, thanks so much. Can you hear me now? All right. People would say, it can't possibly get any bigger, you know, among other things, it'll eat up all the farmland and the English people will starve and so forth. Well, relative to 100 years ago, Greater London is about 4 or 5 times bigger in physical extent, and like America, they have no shortage of food grown, and the people aren't starving. It clearly can happen, okay? So that's the third point. Next point about why this is likely is that in core cities and in built-up urban areas, there really isn't just loads of land to build on. Now, the city of Dallas and the city of Fort Worth are somewhat exceptions. The city of Dallas, there's actually more raw land than any other big city in the United States, according to one ranking. And the city of Fort Worth, unlike Dallas, is still annexing land to the west, which creates some additional raw land within the city borders. So, you know, we're a little bit better off than most cities for the ability to sort of do infill on raw land that has never been built on. But on the whole, I told you we looked at these 25 metropolitan areas. All the core cities, you're talking about like maybe 5% of all of the land mass could possibly turn into housing and is currently raw land. The next point is, well, if you're going to try to house more people in built-up areas and you don't have a lot of raw land, you'd have to actually turn a bunch of what is currently, I don't know, commercial real estate or single-family detached homes and turn it into denser real estate. Well, here's the simple point. That's clearly technically feasible. I would argue it's politically essentially impossible. We do not allow it. And there's no reason whatsoever to be optimistic that we will allow it. I'm not making a statement about whether we should allow it or shouldn't. In fact, my report goes on at some length about all of the ways we should relax excessive rules and allow more infill development and redevelopment of urban areas. Please put me down as I'm on paper, I'm for it, but the evidence suggests we're not going to get a whole lot of bang for the buck there. There's a group led by Joseph Jorko, University of Pennsylvania, did probably the most thorough survey of land use and housing rules in America in the late 00s. Then that group updated it in roughly the year 2019. And what did they show? Across the board, universally, despite all kinds of hand-wringing about housing and the difficulty of building and so forth, across the board, the rules stayed as strict as they were before or got stricter. And even in the small number of places where you have actually seen really interesting reforms, generally speaking, there's enough other obstacles still in the way that you don't get lots of bang for the buck. You get a little bit of bang for the buck, like in Houston, which is among the most growth-friendly core cities anywhere in the world, probably certainly in this country. They did a path-breaking reform of minimum lot size rules. You could build starter homes and townhomes on much smaller lots than is usually allowed in American cities, and they got several tens of thousands of units. So probably the Houston housing stock is maybe like 3% bigger than it otherwise would be from having arguably America's best single urban reform program. So there's a little bit of bang for the buck, but there's not that much bang for the buck. And so we simply aren't allowing it, and I think that we can all say that, well, cities should be smarter, they should allow it. We can tear our hair out and insist that it be so, but it keeps on not becoming so. And that's tough. Well, I think those are the points I kind of wanted to make. So what does the data actually show? These 25 metropolitan areas, including the Dallas-Fort Worth area, they represent about 20% of the American population, but they account for something like 42% of all of the single-family homes and about 37% of all of the apartments and townhomes built in America's metropolitan areas since 2010. So they account for almost half of all the homes getting built in America are in just the Dallases, the Houstons, the Austins, the Atlantas, the Raleighs, Charlottes, Phoenixes, and so forth. We're just hugely dependent in America on these places continuing to grow. And where are they building? Overwhelmingly on the expanding outer edge of the metropolitan areas. Overwhelmingly. We show this, municipality by municipality. So that's the first big point. Next 2 points will be briefer, okay? Second point is, if in fact it's inevitable and feasible, how do we do it smartly? And why is it really important to do it smartly? Well, here's a simple, I'm kind of a numbers guy. So in the report, I estimate that America needs to expand its total housing stock by the year 2050 by about 28 million housing units. So trust me on that. If y'all are numbers people, we can talk about it. So about 28 million. I think if we had something like as good a set of reform policies in core cities as we're really, even if we're super optimistic, Other places follow the lead of Houston and Minneapolis and Charlotte, a couple of the most reform-minded places. I think maybe out of 28 million, we might add something on the order of 2 million in core cities. So we're hugely dependent on how we build out the expanding outer areas. Just to put numbers on it, one thing I want to convey is for anyone who spends much time in like the northern expanses of North Texas, of the region, there's huge differences in density levels in how suburbs are being built out across America. So in McKinney and Frisco, the density levels, total number of people per square mile, is about the same as the city of Fort Worth. So it's not lower, even though it's newer, okay, because they allowed it to happen there. But there are other places in North Texas that are maybe half that level, but you can get lower still in other parts of America. So in some of the fast-growing outer areas of the Phoenix area, where water is a much bigger constraint than it is here, amazingly, there are suburbs being built out at density levels that are something like a quarter the level of, say, McKinney or Frisco. And in the Boston suburbs, most of which have essentially added no new housing in decades, but very beautiful places, if you've been to some of these places, like Natick and Concord and Andover and so forth, all these historical places, the density levels can be as low as maybe 20% the level of like Frisco or McKinney. And absolutely not allowed to build anymore. So you got a huge variety. So here's a simple proposition. If we simple math, okay, thought experiment. If we added 10% to the land mass of all of the metropolitan areas of America, just 10%, it's not that huge in the grand scheme, that'd be something like a small fraction of 1% of all the land mass of the United States. If we built all of that out at the density level of McKinney, we would add about 24 million homes in those places in America. But if we built it out at the density level of some of these Phoenix suburbs, we would add about like 8 or 9 million units. So for solving our housing problems, we are immensely dependent on how we do this. Do we essentially allow somewhat greater density, somewhat bigger variety of housing types to be built in these fast-growing areas? I think that's one of the biggest questions of greatest consequence to the American people, and yet so little discussed. Oftentimes, I think housing experts don't pay enough attention because everybody who writes about housing lives in core cities and loves them, like me, and doesn't really care for suburbs. I think there's kind of this sense of it was all sort of a mistake. It never should have happened. Why couldn't we have just been like Paris or London or Brussels or something? And I'm just here to tell you there was no way that was ever going to happen in the United States. In fact, there's no way it's even going to happen in expanding areas of European or Asian cities, not in the age of the automobile. I mean, short of undoing all kinds of technological change that happened and financial change and economic change that happened over the last century, there was no way that was ever going to happen. But how to do it smartly? Well, just allow a variety of housing types to be built. Developers will tell you if you allow it, it will actually happen. Number two, try to form fully formed cities. Allow job centers to come into being. Try to attract employers of various kinds. Set things up so that people will have, if they live in that suburban city, they will not have monster commutes. We're actually not that bad at doing that in some parts of North Texas. Like the commuting times for people living in Frisco and McKinney aren't really that long. They're kind of about the same as people living in the city of Dallas because mostly they don't commute all the way to the city of Dallas, though obviously a decent number do. Build out the infrastructure intelligently. I moderated a panel several weeks ago that included several people from North Central Texas Council of Governments, not the same individuals with us today, but Michael Morris and a couple of colleagues, and I think there's a lot of great thinking about how you actually build out the road infrastructure in ways that will capture water better and so forth. There's all kinds of ways to improve, and I think we are actively thinking about that. And the people I was with last week are actively thinking about how do we build out the water infrastructure and continue the long-term trend of the average, which I talked about last year at this event, by the way, of the average, gallons of water used per household being on a long-term downtrend. Got to continue that trend. How do we do all those things? Last thing I want to say is when it's all said and done, the net result of what we've seen in North Texas, and again, this may be counterintuitive, and you can throw things at me if you want, but it's better than most of the alternatives. Why do I say it's better than most of the alternatives? Had we realized this enormous expansion outwards in a way that was, let's say, matching the way suburban expansions happened in the 1950s and 1960s in America, I would say we'd be in a very different world. We would not be saying this has been a good thing at all. Because if we replicated the pattern of the 1950s and 60s, it would have been a story of white flight, creating greater racial and ethnic segregation in our metropolitan areas, essentially, if you will, leaving core cities with declining tax bases. We would have seen also vast neighborhoods that are nothing but single-family detached homes on relatively large lots, which would be deeply unsustainable. As my friend Charles Marone of Strong Towns puts it, the growth Ponzi scheme. We would have just built out infrastructure that cannot possibly be supported in the future by the meager tax base you're creating at very, very low density. In every way, we wouldn't be happy with the result. But that's not the world we've been experiencing in the 21st century. The world we've been experiencing in North Texas and in other fast-growing places is actually that we are creating, to some degree, fully formed nascent cities growing up on the prairie, around North Texas and in other fast-growing areas. What we see is rapid growth in job centers, rapid growth in mixed-use, highly walkable, bikeable areas in the hearts of a number of these cities. Chris Lineberger is at the George Washington University in D.C. He's arguably the leading, at least academic spokesperson for the idea we should be enhancing walkability in our cities. I couldn't agree more. I love to walk to an almost eccentric degree and bike. But he helpfully has documented, he and his team have documented in a number of metropolitan areas, including here, what he calls walkable urban places, walk-ups. So a specific place on the map where quantitatively you can say this place is more walkable than most places. And what does he show? Well, the overwhelming majority of walk-ups that have been created in the last 20, 30 years in North Texas are not in the cities of Dallas or Fort Worth, and actually now a significant majority of all the walk-ups that exist are in what we would call suburbs, because they've been, not every last one, but some have been very successful at creating mixed-use job centers with a fair bit of townhomes and apartments in close proximity to work centers and so forth. So that's kind of a model that's working. Also, demographically, what we've essentially done is create very, very diverse cities that reflect America in a growing number of suburban cities. And I think that is good. Now, suburban cities do have to contend with all the challenges. They have to contend with poverty rates that are more or less the same as core cities. So the challenges, but also the opportunities. Like I said, the commute times have been held relatively down. And the last thing I want to say before I call up the panel, or do we have I don't know if we have time for any Q&A. But in a larger sense, here's a philosophical point. And this may be, I wrestle with whether I actually think this is a good thing or not, but I think it nonetheless is. I think in America, we have been a country that is culturally on the move from inception. We have been a place that is fundamentally better at creating new places than completely rebuilding old places. And that has challenges. Because we are better at the one than at the other, we have a pretty enormous social and economic problem of places that have been in decline, in many cases, cities that have been in decline population-wise since maybe 1940 or 1950, and are drastically smaller, like St. Louis, Detroit, Cleveland, a number of others, which that's a very serious challenge and poses many challenges for the people who live there. But nonetheless, in the grand scheme, the reality is we have created a whole lot of relatively successful new places. And if we didn't, we would be worse off for it because I think that what we have going for us here is a long history of if a place just sort of becomes stagnant, becomes corrupt, becomes sclerotic, becomes all about just protecting the interests of the people who are already there and not being welcoming to newcomers or up-and-comers, young people and so forth, well, they always had an outlet. They could go somewhere else. And that ability to go somewhere else has finally made us a stronger country with more upward mobility, more opportunity, but with a lot of side effects as a result. So our great challenge, I would argue, the outward expansion is going to happen, for sure. The great challenge is to do it more intelligently than we have done it, more sustainably, more carefully, looser rules in some respects, better planning in other respects. I wrote about this a lot, and I was delighted that the New York Times also seems to think it's a story worth telling. So if you all would like to raise any questions before the panel comes up, I would be honored. Thank you.
Thank you, Cullum. And we'll definitely have time for questions also after the panel, and Cullum's going to join us on that panel as well. But I really appreciate it. Now I can invite Matt Craig and our other panelists up here to join. I really love how Cullum framed this idea of density and urbanity not being a binary decision between suburb and urban, and that there's new ways of thinking about growth. And we're going to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper with several people who are very involved on that planning side and how we can prep for the future that way. So thank you all.
Morning.